Gain Reduction Committee. Today's Monday, August 24th. Chairman, Councilmember Joe Buscaino. I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues, Council Members Yuri Martinez, Mitchell Farrell, Curran Price, David Rue. Welcome to the Board of Public Works Ed Roybal hearing room. Hope you had a nice, blessed weekend. We're going to start the committee meeting here. If I can turn to your attention to the agenda. We have cards, I believe, from Wayne on items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If I can call you up, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak on all 6 items. Wayne, you're up. 3 minutes, thank you.
Yes, very good. I appreciate giving me so much time, a whole 3 minutes to cover 6 items, 30 seconds an item. Does that sound fair, David Rue? That doesn't sound fair. Sounds like discrimination to me. So we have today the usual things that we always have. CD7 on item number 1. That's Mr. Chipmunk Fuentes' district. So there's no impact statement submitted, so you have to vote no on that. Now we have number 2, dedication from 15 feet to 0 feet. Oh, that's giving a developer who pays off the council a sidewalk reduction from 15 feet to 0 feet. That means you get 15 more feet on the line so that you can over-densify and build more overdeveloped real estate. And then another 2 foot set aside to 0, which means they can build right up to the street. Another scam. And that's against all of the regulations, but you'll approve that. Now we're attacking the homeless again. Item number 3. Item number 4. You continue to discriminate and attack homelessness by criminalizing people who cannot afford to pay the rents in the city. Now you're talking about wooden structures affixed with wheels. It's called a fucking wheelbarrow. That's what it's called, or it's called a wagon. Man developed the wheel. Man developed the wheel so that he could move shit around on wheels, so he doesn't have to drag it on the ground. You're going to ban wooden structures with wheels. What's next? Cars? This is just the same thing. You're trying to go against the Ninth Circuit's policy on 8th Amendment violations. You cannot take and criminalize somebody's status as homeless. You have a right in this country to be homeless. You have a right in this country not to be like you guys on the take. These people don't have money to pay the rents in the city. You're not building more affordable housing. So now you're going to criminalize them and put them in jails. And that's bullshit. And the Ninth Circuit's not going to allow it. I'm not going to allow it. The activists aren't going to allow it. And Black Lives Matter is not going to allow it. Because they're going to start coming to these meetings like the police commission. They're going to be there tomorrow telling the police commission to stop killing people because they are homeless. So build affordable housing for these people and do what you're supposed to do instead of criminalizing somebody's status because they don't have a roof over their head and can't afford one. Stop this discrimination now.
Okay, if I can invite Herman to speak on items 1, 2, and 4. You two will be given 3 minutes to speak on the 3 items.
Joe Blow is discriminating again, allowing us only 30 seconds per agenda
Stay on the items.
I'm talking about the agenda items. Fucked up. Bottom line, straight out of Compton, bro. You know what's up? Your friend Chipmunk on item 1 is Felipe Fuentes. No comment. He's a chipmunk.
Hold his time,
Item
please.
2,
Hold his time.
overdeveloped scam.
Hold on. You have a card just submitted on item 3 as well. Start his time over. You can speak on item, again, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 3 minutes. Thank you.
So going on topic now. It has been an issue regarding homelessness. And as you all read and know, Harry Ferguson and Carol Sobel have agreed with us that you've become the worst city to discriminate against the homeless population. Although you don't have any respect for anyone who's homeless, Joe Blow. Because if this was the case, the same issues going on in Long Beach would have been resolved. But the Ninth Circuit will not disagree with me based on racism, Black Lives Matter, and Herman's bullshit matters to address the issue on homelessness regarding wooden structures affixed with wheels, things that go round and round, Joe Blow. Also, in this Planet Aid versus the City of St. John's, here it's talking about the removal of unintended donation collection. That to me is not important. So going back on item 3, it talks about these structures in the San Pedro area, and after communities across the city are being used as temporary shelters for the homeless, where in the hell do you expect people to live then if they can't afford to live anywhere in the LA County, specifically in Los Angeles, Joe Blow? Think about it. Ex-officer making many dollars on his retirement to be a scumbag against homeless people who have very little. Such great oppressor. Such great oppressor. So Black Lives That Do Matter have began to build their homes along the sidewalks. Build them in the parks. Make them out of tree houses. Set up a tent out of cardboard. Things that Mr. Curran Price is well familiar with. But Mr. Curran Price, along with Gil Cedillo, are working very hard to improve the quality of life in Los Angeles. And it is a matter of time before Mr. Roo will proceed in that same motion. I can't say much for Nuri because Nuri tends not to clean up her sidewalk and streets in the valley. When I'm up there in Van Nuys, I notice that there's a lot of urine on the sidewalk and it smells on Van Nuys Boulevard. And many people will agree with me on that. Take a walk up there by Van Nuys and smell the sidewalk and streets. But in addition to that, let people sleep on the sidewalk. Let people rest on the sidewalk. Stop harassing and retaliating and discriminating, as they call it. Discriminatory racism.
Very good, thank you. Okay, colleagues, looking at the agenda here, items 1 and 2. If we can consider those items, take these items on consent. Okay, without objection, that'll be the order. We'll approve items 1 and 2. Okay, items 3, 4, 5, and 6 we'll take separately, but just want to make a comment before we dive into these items. I, like many of our colleagues, have expressed a lot of annoyance and frustration and irritation that public streets and sidewalks and alleys are being taken over by public property, such as storage bins, these wooden dog houses, illegal dumping, storage pods, and the city's response to picking these items up has, quite frankly, been pitiful. And I know we can do better. We will hear from the city attorney to get some direction on how these items are violating the law and what actions we can take today to be responsive to the people that we serve. We'll also hear from the city departments as far as who's responsible for enforcing what, from street services to the investigation and enforcement of street services to our Sanitation Watershed Protection Division, who are here today. We'll also find out who's responsible for the actual removal of these various objects that have ultimately have impacted the quality of life in our city. and what the process is on the removal of these large items. And lastly, we hope to hear from the city folks on the importance of getting the information out to our residents and how to report the pickup of these various objects. So with that, let's take item number 3, and if you can read that into the record, Mr. Clerk.
As necessary to report on the legality of the placement of small wooden structures affixed with wheels in both the public right-of-way and on private property, and recommend removal protocol for city departments to follow. This matter has also been referred to the Homelessness and Poverty Committee.
Thank you. So in recent weeks, we've seen a few of these wooden shacks appear across the city. I know 3 in San Pedro. I know, Mr. Alfaro, 1 in your district, a few in CD 11 as well. A few also in the Skid Row area. The question we need to ask ourselves is this how we want to house the most vulnerable in our city? And we owe a debt of gratitude to those who have the right intentions, who are doing everything they can along with the city to address the issue and do everything to house those who need the housing the most. In my district specifically, I have we're working on redevelopment of the waterfront, bringing in housing and economic development, but these wooden shacks are not the real estate that I'm looking for in my district. It has definitely been an issue of importance recently, specifically in the harbor area, and right away we drafted this motion to get some direction from the city attorney on how we address these temporary wooden shacks, these temporary shelters that are being used across the city for the homeless. Obviously, these structures are unpermitted. Mr. Alfaro and I just recently, I just cannot sleep well at night knowing that you can put one of these wooden shacks on the street, on the public street, and on public right-of-way. We know that these structures are unpermitted. They have no utilities, no running water, no sewer connection, no reflected markings to make them visible to drivers. And ultimately, I feel that these wooden shacks pose a great risk to public health and public safety in our city. So I'd like to call up the city attorney to come forward. Ms. Flores?
Good afternoon, council members. Senior Assistant City Attorney Valerie Flores. I did want to note that these recently constructed shacks or structures already are unlawful under the newly enacted 5611. They would constitute a bulky item. And under the ordinance, bulky items may be removed from public areas, including streets, sidewalks, or any city-owned or controlled property. Again, as you said, they do pose hazards in the roadway. They don't meet the definition of a vehicle under the state vehicle code. They lack certain safety features like reflective markings, as you mentioned. So under our current city law, they may be treated as a bulky item under our municipal code.
So I was asked recently that, do these wooden shacks, are they treated like vehicles? Last time I checked, these wooden shacks don't have a California license plate, so they're not treated as vehicles. That
they don't. And under the vehicle code, in order to be considered a vehicle, an actual vehicle needs to be able to be moved by some sort of a propellant other than a human. So unless these vehicles had motors and met some of the other requirements for a licensed vehicle on a state roadway, which at least the pictures we've seen, these shacks don't meet those safety requirements, and they, as you noticed, aren't licensed either. So
again, so my understanding of what you're saying, Ms. Flores, is these wooden shacks are treated as a bulky item and can be removed per the existing 5611 ordinance that the city council passed recently. I understand there was a clause to expedite this ordinance, and
Yes.
the ordinance is in the books today.
Yes. It is currently affected. It was passed with an urgency clause, so it is in effect today. And just to clarify, 5611 includes all public property, so includes
We're
streets,
talking about today, right?
sidewalks, lots, wherever, if it's a public property. There are different issues that apply if one of these shacks are put up on private property. There might be zoning issues that would come into play, but in terms of getting them off of the public areas, the city already is empowered to do so under 5611.
So if these wooden shacks appear on private property, say on someone's front lawn, that would be a matter to be taken up by
building and
safety, right?
Correct. Mhm. Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'll turn it over to colleagues. Ms. Martinez?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just so that I can be clear on this, so Code 5611, that falls under the building and safety?
No, that's in our municipal code.
So that's the code that those are our enforcement options, fall under 5611?
Yes, 5611 makes it unlawful to place bulky items on public property
So that's
without
the
a
option
permit.
that we have.
Yes.
The other thing is, do we know if there's an organization or who's actually building these structures? Is it the people themselves, or is there somebody in some of these communities that are helping build some of these structures? Do we know?
I understand there's an individual in South Los Angeles has a GoFundMe effort to raise money, again, well-intentioned, and they're using this individual to raise money and to ask folks across the city to help build these shacks.
Is there something that we can do, that the city attorney's office can do regarding folks who help fund these type of structures? Because obviously
Right.
it's illegal to do so, but then I also think there's a lot of liability on behalf of the city if something were to happen to someone who's living inside of this structure. So I want to make sure that we're not liable in case something happens, and we're not the ones building them. So if there is someone who is, then I think there needs to be some legal
Right. So
advice that this individual receives from somebody.
depending on the circumstances, someone who builds and places one of these structures on public property might be liable or guilty of illegal dumping. But again, I think the city, in approaching this, maybe needs to be mindful of the maybe good intentions,
Correct.
but you would have that as a potential weapon if somebody refuses to stop doing this, because if they build it and then they transport it and put it on public property, even if it's for the benefit of someone who's homeless, they have essentially dumped property on a city right-of-way. And so we could potentially prosecute them under the city's illegal dumping statutes.
So is that something you're currently looking into?
Well, it would be by way of a complaint through the police department and then a referral to our office. We haven't had any referrals, but, and again, if the city identifies who's putting these structures in the public right-of-way, you might want to let them know it's an illegal activity, and then if they don't stop, make a police report and then go through the regular process.
So one last question. Has your office contacted the individual who has set up a GoFund to help build some of these structures?
Our office currently isn't aware of who's doing it, but if and again, the first point of contact would probably be the police department. But if we got a referral, we would use our filing discretion to look at it. But again, maybe the person or persons who are putting these structures in the public right-of-way don't realize yet that it's unlawful. So maybe there needs to be some education first. But again, if there's a filing, if there's a police report and a referral to our office, we will evaluate it like we would all other filings.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Flores, thank you for all your work on on the whole updating of the 5611. It's a long time coming, and you did such great work, you and your colleagues. So thank you for that. I have visited several homeless encampments in my district over the last 5 days. One of them in particular, there is an arson who has set 6 fires in the encampment over the last number of months, 5 or 6 months or so, including another very mysterious fire just on Friday. And when I think about the crime that occurs in some of these encampments, and in every last instance, and again, I talk about this a lot, we always bring resources, we offer emergency shelter, and in every last instance in the last 5 days of the encampments I visited, every last person has refused any assistance we've offered. And so when we take a look at homelessness, we always have to consider, the addiction issues, the alcoholism issues, the mental health issues. We bring our county partners. Still, there's a reluctance to accept assistance. Nonetheless, there are crimes that occur within these encampments, and more often than not, crimes against one another within that encampment. I'm horrified at the thought of one of these wooden shacks being set on fire with someone inside, and it could very easily happen. I would consider the preponderance of these wooden shacks being rolled out an immediate hazard to the public safety. That's just my opinion, but I think we could make an argument that they do pose that kind of a threat, and since we have the laws on the books right now to mitigate it, then I would think it would be worth considering. And I'm not so kind-hearted toward those who are making these happen. I'll give you an example of why. We have one person who calls himself an artist, and he exploits one of the members of a certain homeless encampment by making it an art sort of scene. In my district, one of these new wooden houses has popped up, and this artist has painted a whole scene behind the house as though it's this bucolic, lovely area, and it is once again exploiting this homeless person for the sake of his art. And he knows exactly what he's doing. So I'm less forgiving, I think, than a lot of people might be on taking a look at this and mitigating it as soon as we can. And I also want to put an end to the myth that keeps getting perpetuated that we're not building permanent supportive housing for the homeless, because we certainly are, by the hundreds, if not thousands. Not to mention affordable housing. The city is fully engaged in increasing our affordable housing products. So I want to put an end to that myth that we're not producing product, because we are. And in my district alone, in the coming year, we're going to have several hundred units of permanent supportive housing start under construction. So we have to look at this comprehensively, but we absolutely have to take a look at the public safety element as it relates to those who live in the encampments and families who are forced to walk by because it's the only public right-of-way that they have to get from point A to B, and they might live right next door to this. So we can't be Pollyanna in our approach. I've said this before. We have to look at it comprehensively, and I'm hoping that our friends in Sanitation and Bureau of Street Services will really come through with this program to help mitigate this. And lastly, because I'm going on too long, is I want to thank Sanitation for the incredible job they did in my district on Saturday. We had a major, major day of action, and Sanitation really came through. So I know that our departments are up to the challenge. I know the City Attorney's Office has done an excellent job helping us with the legal ramifications of what we're looking at. And I think we absolutely must do something about the proliferation of these wooden houses that are not permitted.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. O'Farrell, you're absolutely right. Some of the frustrations that I've come across is the point where you can't help those who refuse help. In the last 7 months, with my emergency response team, we've housed 71 individuals and made over 1,300 referrals. In fact, the 3 individuals that were in these wooden shacks in San Pedro were offered shelter, and they too refused. So again, we have to, help one soul at a time, little by little, and those who want it, we will embrace. We will show our mercy to the others who still need the help with the addiction, still need help with the way of just getting back on their feet. And also, as you know, I've said this over and over, there's so much unreported crime taking place in these encampments, and I believe these tiny wooden shacks would add to that public health, public safety problem that, we are finding the unreported crime within the shelter-resistant community involving rape, involving assaults, involving drug sales and drug use. So the problem continues, but knowing that we need to make hold everyone accountable as far as adding to the public health and public safety issue. Mr. Rue?
I just had a quick question for the city attorney. I'm sorry.
Ms. Flores?
Just wanted to follow up on Councilmember Martinez's question. In the structures regarding liability, assuming, let's say, some car crashed into it and someone did get hurt, so would the city be liable, or who would be liable?
I mean, certainly we would have defenses that we didn't build it, approve it, put it there, but that's not to stop someone from naming us in a lawsuit, which happens all the time, whether we do or don't have liability. So once we learn about something, if we think it does pose a safety hazard, even though we might not have legal liability, we might get dragged into a lawsuit anyway, so we would always advise to, take action if we can to make sure that the public is safe.
So in that instance, could we go after the GoFundMe person, the city, if we got sued?
Again, if it might meet the elements of an illegal dumping case if you have someone who is building these structures and putting them in the public right away. So yes.
So if the structure collapsed, or if the structure, some car hit it and someone got injured who was in that structure, we could go after the person who
right.
built it.
If we're sued, we could bring a cross complaint against the person if we can find the person and they are judgment proof, meaning they have assets. We could go after them to
it might even
recover.
be a good thing to have the city attorney make a little statement, and we could somehow let these folks at GoFundMe or whatnot know.
I think we've raised the conversation on this specific issue of the tiny homes, and now it's more of an education campaign to let folks know that these tiny shacks are not allowed in our city streets. Mr. Price.
I agree that we really need to limit, to prevent the proliferation. I agree for all the reasons stated. But have any other cities permitted these type structures on their streets?
I don't know of any. Again, most cities have very strict building codes to make sure that any structures that are approved for human habitation have a bare minimum of access, safe electrical, safe ventilation, running water. I'm sure there's a list of mandatory components of a structure that's approved for living, and all cities have these same sorts of building codes. And from what I've seen of these structures, they don't meet current safety requirements under the building code.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Flores. Can I bring up some of our individuals from our Sanitation Watershed Protection Division?
Council members, my name is Steve Patterson, Bureau of Sanitation.
Thank you, Steve. So, for those listening, again, this is an education campaign to let folks know in the city of Los Angeles, if they come across a tiny wooden shack in the city of LA, what did you suggest for them to do?
We had a meeting about a week and a half ago to come up with a protocol for this type of situation. And at that time, and was pending consultation from the city attorney's office, which we hadn't received yet, we were going to go and wrap the structures up and send them to storage.
So you have clear direction now. Once you get a call from a business or a constituent of these tiny wooden shacks here in the city of Los Angeles, that you know now that they are going to be handled as a bulky item. Is that my understanding?
Right. In consultation with our executive staff, they would like to have a sit down with the city attorney just to go over the particulars of that. And
I don't think we need another sit down. Ms. Flores, can you please come up and give some direction? I think we were clear on her presentation, Steve, right? so it's clear that under current law, under the current 5611 that was passed by this council, even with the urgency clause, we have it in place that these tiny wooden shacks in the city of LA can be removed immediately.
Correct.
Okay. Ms. Martinez?
I had a follow-up question. I don't want to get too much into the Levon case, but are we going to be subject to store these structures as well? Because currently we can't clear or remove someone's shopping cart. So now are we going to be subject to store yet one more thing?
Well, the Levon injunction only applies in Skid Row, but even under current Levon protocols, we do not store bulky items.
So this would fall under bulky items?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we are now looking for warehouses to store these structures as well.
Correct.
And,
I mean, again, to avoid a lawsuit, you may want to consider, if you know who built the structure, to give them actual notice. The city intends to remove, and discard this house. It's, again, that's a policy issue, but under current law, you may immediately discard them, pick them up, and discard them.
they're being treated as a bulky item, right?
Correct. Right, but again, that's why you may want to consider giving.
Well, okay, let me give you.
notice
We
first.
need to revisit this because I don't like the fact, that premise, like until we get sued, I almost feel like we have to cover all of our bases because that's going to come eventually. Someone's going to figure out that this is someone's private property, falls in that definition, and if we don't begin to answer these questions now, we're going to see ourselves in another lawsuit that we cannot get out of.
But this is, again, private property, someone's private property on a city street. Right. Shopping cart is also considered a bulky item.
Yes, the cart itself is considered a bulky item. The stuff in the cart, we don't store the cart itself. We
You store the personal belongings.
cart. Correct.
So in our situation, our experience in San Pedro with the 3 tiny shacks, we offered the assistance, we offered the shelter, they refused, and they had an opportunity to take their belongings, in which they did, and they complied. And 90% of the time, 95% of the time, these individuals comply and move on. And that was our experience. And then the individuals who built these wooden shacks were able to take them off and move them to their private property. That was our experience in the harbor area.
I'm sorry to have to keep going back to this, but so if we're discarding the structure, what are you doing with the things inside the structure?
Again, under 5611, if there are personal property items in the structure, we would bag tag and store them.
We have
under
to
our
store
current-
something, okay.
Yes.
So not the structure itself. Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just point of clarification. I heard Mr. Peterson say that the structures are going to storage and not disposal. Did I hear you correctly?
They would be taken, at the time we had our meeting, they would be taken to our harbor yard and stored there for the 90 days.
For how many days?
90.
Because bulky items aren't stored for any amount of time. They're just disposed of. So
That's correct. We didn't have a bulky items
I want
definition at the
to
time.
make sure I understand. So the practice will be to store them at San Pedro Yard for how many days?
90.
90 days. See, I think that we need to talk about that. And the other thing, as far as the structures themselves, it's certainly easy to post on them that this is considered a bulky item. This sanitation will be back to retrieve in X amount of time. So the posting and removal should not be an issue at all. But I think the whole storing for 90 days, I question that, because if we do truly consider it a bulky item, then we should dispose of it.
I would agree.
So that seems to be unresolved, that piece of it.
So back to this item that we're on, the direction of the city attorney is to give city departments like our, our folks, our friends at Sanitation and LAPD, just clear direction on how we handle tiny wooden shacks in the city of LA. And once we confiscate them, obviously it's going to, I'm going to assume, as Mr. Flores said, they're going to be identified as a bulky item. And you're right, we don't store bulky items for 90 days. So this motion before us will give that direction. Mr. Price.
Yeah, just curious, how many structures like this are we talking about currently? we know? Is there a citywide guesstimate?
One more time.
How
Council?
many structures like this
That we know of?
that we know of? Yeah.
We've seen the ones, or we've seen in the photographs the ones in San Pedro.
There's three. Also,
And
Any other reports, though? Have you received any other reports?
not at this time.
Mr. Rue?
Mr. Chair, so are they going to come back with a report back to our committee, or is this?
Yes, the direction from our committee, once approved, will get the overall approval from City Council. It's going to be actually dual referred as well to the Homeless Committee. And then once that's going, it was dual referred. So once it's heard by the Homeless Committee, it will come to full City Council and to give the direction of the City Attorney. And make sure this is clear, black and white, on how we handle these tiny homes in the city of Los Angeles.
So once the city attorney comes up with a code, they'll also come up with a way of enforcement mechanism as well?
Code's already in place. It's just the direction.
Direction on how to enforce
how to well, not how to enforce, but how to handle the bulky item. Because right now, they're storing them, which I don't understand why you're storing these bulky items. We don't store bulky items in the city of LA. We get rid of bulky items.
Mr. Chair, I would ask also, what if someone claims a mattress as, that's their mattress that they sleep on? Are we going to start storing mattresses
Right.
too?
Storing mattresses in my
I mean,
No.
I'm just
Yeah.
putting it out there.
The reason during our meeting a week and a half ago, it was we thought that the definition of tent was a better description, and hence we decided we'd store these items.
I'm sorry. You're identifying these
5611
wooden shacks as tents.
In 5611, under definition of tent, talks about a structure where it's enclosed on all sides, roof, and then has an opening on one side. And that's the definition at the time we thought best matched the tiny houses.
Well, you have to, as far as going back to how we're addressing 5611, because we're dissecting that in Homeless and Poverty Committee.
Right. I think arguably one of these shacks could be considered a tent, but we don't believe that's the correct definition under 5611 because it's clear from the ordinance that tents need to be deconstructed during daytime hours, and these houses are not capable of being deconstructed, and so we believe that they fall under the definition of bulky items instead of tents because of the more permanent nature of the way they're constructed.
Okay, so based on your definition of a tent, can we then now stop the activity of storing these structures?
Again,
I'm asking the department. So, do you need further clarification on what falls under the definition of a tent? I just want the activity to stop. Quite frankly.
Yes, city attorney says it's not a tent, and we buy that.
Well, but I think there's still opportunity for, we're a very litigious society, litigious city. Is there any, could there be any legal uses for this structure? Can someone claim that? Right, no,
there's no
so I just want to, can someone make that argument that this, like a tent, obviously you could say I could pack it up and.
if it's on private property and it's not used for human habitation, maybe you were going to store your lawnmower in it or something.
Right.
That might be okay depending on your building codes in your area. But if it's intended, it does not meet the requirements for human habitation, at least the ones we've seen. So no, it can't be used for human habitation.
The city attorney already made a determination that this structure is going to be considered bulky item.
Correct. It fits within the definition of bulky item. That is not to say that the city can't voluntarily store for 90 days or some other period, but we don't believe there's a legal requirement to store them.
Mr. Rue, the only legal use of these wooden shacks are for dogs, and this is not the way we treat the most vulnerable in our community. It's not the way to house people in our city who are homeless. Yeah, that's the way I see it.
And it's very Now that I think about this, the secondary part is, one is for the structure, but when we go out and, maybe street service could answer this one. When you guys go out to confiscate or take the structure, do you guys go out with LAPD? Who do you go out with?
I'm with Sanitation.
I'm Sanitation, I'm sorry.
Yes, LAPD accompanies us.
Oh, no, but it's Sanitation who's responsible. No, Sanitation's fine. Because I was wondering, luckily it's not a proliferation, and we want to stop this before it even starts, but because one of the things about bulky item removal is whenever LAPD is involved, I mean, if we could somehow have some other social workers go with them, or get some of the county contracted social workers or who have contracts that do outreach work to be part of your team. And I think it'll also help you out as well, because if that person is there, they're not going to appreciate whether it's their shopping cart or whether it's this structure, and there might be tension, and that's the bigger thing I'm worried about. The structure, whether we throw it away or store it, I'm okay with that, but the actual inhabitant, because, and most frankly, if they're living in a structure like this, not only are they vulnerable, but they're probably mentally ill.
Yep.
And you probably would appreciate if you had some sort of social worker or some sort of outreach worker with you, and I don't know how we do that.
So, Mr. Rue, in our experience with these wooden shacks that appeared in downtown San Pedro, I funded a emergency response team through LASA, a dedicated team for my district, and they're partnering with the LAPD Harbor's Quality of Life car. So, of course, LASA comes with the wraparound services, offering the shelter and the other mental health services, and that's, I totally agree with you. Again, something that we just can't arrest our way out. It's more having the resources readily available when we're approaching the individuals living in these small wooden shacks.
Yes, I'd like to add also that we do have LASA on many occasions when we're doing the cleanup, or PATH, who subcontracts with LASA.
So if we could include that, because in the newly formed committee that I chair, we're trying to look into trying to leverage and bring in more services for all of these issues that we have. So, but I'd love to come talk to you about what you guys are doing.
If you want, Mr. Rue, we can amend this to include utilizing wraparound services once we approach these tiny homes, and require either LASA or PATH or one of the service providers that are in contact with the city when we are addressing these issues citywide. I know we're doing it in our district. We can amend it to include that.
That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be really good.
And Mr. Cho, just to sort of tag along with what you said, that's our process. I've also funded extra outreach workers. Just on Saturday, we were out with PATH, LASA, Olympic Division, City Attorney's Office, and 4 additional nonprofits that offer services to those less fortunate. That's our protocol. We never, ever, ever, nor do the city departments that I'm aware of, approach encampments without offering a whole, menu of options to assist people, including vouchers to get them into immediate emergency shelter. So that's always the process that we've used, and I think it's good to, maybe memorialize it with this, but that's the process that the city has used in my memory since 2002.
Mr. Price?
Our office is also providing some supplemental services, staffing, an outreach team, and I think it's important that we have that collaboration, and I think that's going to be the reason for us to be successful. Homelessness especially is a real troubling problem citywide. The encampments, all around us now, and so I think focusing resources there, collaborating and providing some additional resources over and above, as council officers are doing, demonstrates the commitment that we have. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Okay, so with this item, we'll move this item forward as amended. to include wraparound services once we visit these wooden shacks in the city of Los Angeles. And we'll have the city attorney draft some clear direction. And to reiterate Ms. Martinez's point that these are bulky items. They should not be stored for 90 days. We don't store bulky items. We don't store mattresses and shopping carts for 90 days. We do store the personal items that are recovered for 90 days today. And that's what we'll continue to do once we, as we approach this problem, this issue across the city. Okay, so that'll be the order on this item. Thank you so much for your presentation. And looking at item number 4, Mr. Clerk, if you can read that. Thank you. Again, another back-to-basic item before us, another quality of life issue. As a senior lead, this was a thorn on my side. One of the storage or these bins that would appear out of nowhere on city property, on the public right-of-way, specifically on sidewalks. And going back to why 5611 was approved, folks have argued that 5611 was targeted towards the homeless population. Not true. There are many reasons why we need 5611, a new 5611 in the books, because of these types of issues, like the item before us right now, these donation collection bins. I just scratch my head how a private company can make money off of using public spaces in the city of Los Angeles. So we heard this item a while back in this committee. If Ms. Flores, I believe, again, this is no different than the wooden shacks, right?
Yes, and actually, that's the good news. Even though this case came down, this Planet Aid case, it did restrict the city from enacting an ordinance to deal with unattended collection boxes and treating them any different than other receptacles. We had already adopted, or we have already adopted 5611, and these, in the public spaces, these unattended collection boxes are bulky items that are unpermitted. And so we can already treat them like we would treat any other bulky item and remove them from the public right-of-way. Again, we would, to the extent there is information on the collection boxes that demonstrate who owns them, we would recommend that the city give notice and ask the company that put the box there to come and pick it up, but or to remove it. But we can legally simply take it off the right-of-way. There is a question, however, whether what we can do with regard to these unattended collection boxes on private property. And the case does speak to that. So we were in the process of drafting an ordinance that required permits and set up a protocol for unattended collection boxes on private property. When this case came down, it made clear that we can't distinguish between unattended collection boxes and other types of receptacles in terms of how we treat them, because these collection boxes are a way of engaging in a First Amendment protected activity of seeking solicitations, and that's true both for commercial operators of these boxes and the nonprofit operators. However, we could, if the committee and council so desires, draft an ordinance that deals with all types of receptacles, as long as we don't distinguish between collection boxes and other types of receptacles, and require anyone who wants to have one on private property to get a permit and go through certain protocols.
Ms. Martinez?
Ms. Flores, I wanted to ask you, so is this, so what's the difference between item 4 and 5? Because I recall amending, I know we're not in item 5 yet, but I recall amending Mr. Parks's original motion regarding these bins back in January of this year to include clothing bins. And then Mr. Englander came back and wanted to also include dumpsters and storage bins for the sole purpose of advertisement. So I just want to see one ordinance to include all of this.
It would deal with all receptacles.
Okay.
But again, any receptacle in the public area already is unlawful if it doesn't have a permit.
And with the motion that I recall amending, it talked about that. It talked about permitting a way to permit some of these storage bins.
So with regard to permitting on public property, that is tricky because we already have exclusive advertising rights to public property. So a lot of these bins have advertisements on it. So there might not be a way to lawfully allow these unattended collection bins on public property. But there is a method to allow them on private property, provided we've been working with Building and Safety to formulate some guidelines about where they can be located on private property to make sure they don't interfere with intersection visibility or egress and ingress. So we could move forward with that and bring you back an ordinance that would deal with collection boxes and all other types of receptacles on private property.
Well, now that I'm recalling the ones that are on private property, such as schools. There's tons of them on school property, right outside of school property, and sometimes the school doesn't even know how the bin got there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are unattended.
Right. If it's on public property, we can remove them under 5611. If it's on another government property and they've allowed it, we can't go on to like a school and remove it because that's school district property. But if it's on city-controlled or owned property, we can. And then we can regulate receptacles on private property if you would like us to.
Okay. So you're bringing one ordinance to us that's going to include all these different types of...
Yes, and just so you know, there are other types of receptacles that would be subject to this new ordinance if you still want us to bring it forward. So, for example, a lot of, I know they're not in existence anymore, but like Blockbuster used to have these return bins, but I think there are still some Netflix bins where you can return things and they're sort of out in the parking lot. All of those sorts of receptacles would be subject to the new ordinance because we couldn't distinguish between what the message of the receptacle. But they all have certain similarities in terms of impacting visibility of the intersection, needing to be picked up and maintained. A lot of them get filled with graffiti or the contents are overflowing onto public and private property and just creating nuisances. So we can deal with all of that. We can require a permit. We can require weekly pickups, regardless of what the box is collecting or seeking or doing. We can just require maintenance. We can require where it's placed on the public property to make sure it's not interfering. But again, it will apply to all receptacles on private property. If you want us to continue to bring that, that's kind of after the case Planet A, that's the kind of ordinance we were planning to deliver.
Mr. Price.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we want something that's comprehensive that covers all these areas. Nothing more frustrating for me in my first year or so was calling in these boxes. I mean, they just appear, like you say, overnight and very presumptively, middle of the sidewalk, on the
Tagged.
side. Yeah, and it's an eyesore. Frequently, they get filled and then overfill, and it just becomes. Anyway, I don't have to tell you. But tell me this: what's the how is the Planet A decision going to impact our collection efforts then?
Right.
Will it or won't it, or what's the story?
The Planet 8 case said that a city can't distinguish between unattended collection boxes and any other receptacles because that's distinguishing. That would be a content-based ordinance, which would violate the First Amendment. But 5611, which we already passed, was content neutral. It applied to any bulky item in the public right-of-way. It didn't say if it's a bulky item with this sort of message or this sort of purpose, it's okay or not okay. So currently under 5611, which was content neutral. We can go ahead and pick up all of those boxes in the public right-of-way. With regard to regulating them on public property, the Planet Aid case would simply tell us that you can't single out collection boxes. If you want to deal with receptacles, that's fine, but you have to treat all receptacles on public property, private property similarly. So we were planning to take out, sort of the target of just addressing collection boxes and drafting an ordinance that deals with receptacles on private property, because that would be lawful under the case.
Yeah, well, let's do that one then.
Thank you. Mr. Root.
So, just to be crystal clear, on public property, Planet Aid or any of these donation boxes, they could place it, but they need a permit?
Well, again, we don't believe we can lawfully hand out permits to put the boxes on the public right-of-way for a variety of reasons. ADA, even where sidewalks is wide enough, these boxes contain advertisements, and so we have restrictions about allowing advertising in the public right-of-way. So we believe that the better course is not to allow any of them on public property.
So currently, right now, all these boxes are illegal on public property.
Correct.
And what do we do right now? Do we collect them? I mean, do we pick them up and?
Well, I believe probably Sanitation is waiting for direction about how the city wants to handle them. I mean, they should be. The legal answer is we should be getting rid of them because, again, we don't. 5611 was meant to
For
address.
clarification, Ms. Flores, it's street services, right? Street services are picking these up, right?
Right, street services. Some of them have clothes, and sometimes Sanitation will come out to deal with clothes because they tend to have health hazards associated with them. But it's the normal protocol. But we really should be treating all bulky items in the public right-of-way similarly, because otherwise we don't want to just discriminate against some types of property and not others. So now that 5611 is on the books, our public works workers, street services, sanitation, should be identifying bulky items in the right-of-way and getting a schedule and fair, not with regard to what message they have or who does or doesn't own them, but just making a list and systematically picking up all bulky items in the right-of-way.
I think you said earlier, though, if there's a number on it or if there's a description of who owns that, you're going to try to call them first?
Again, we would recommend to avoid lawsuit if we can identify who owns them, to give the owner at least some notice. One, it could save the city the cost of removing it if the owner's willing to come and remove it. But yes, we would recommend that be done prior to the city removing it.
So again, would you be coming? Is today the report, or are you going to come back with
Today's the report. We did want to get clarification on whether you're still interested in having us bring forward a receptacle ordinance
for private
property. If you could give us direction today, that would be helpful.
So for public property, before you start picking it up, if you could identify all of these agencies prior and maybe send them a letter or contact them and tell them to give them an option and pick it up and take it back first.
Yeah, so we will work with street services to do just that. We'll try to get a list of known owners of these collection boxes in the public right-of-way and let them know that we're going to be starting to collect them.
Even a press release from the city, letting them all know, because that way it'll save us money so we don't have to pick it up.
Again, that education campaign is key on all these items. Mr. Price and then Mr. O'Farrell.
Yeah, just a quick one. The dumpster on private property, no plan to license or recall for permits, or what are we doing?
Yeah, the ordinance we would bring back would require a permit to place a collection box or any other receptacle on private property, and the permit would require a permit fee. It would require weekly pickup and maintenance of the structure. It would allow the city to specify where the receptacle could and couldn't be placed on the property to make sure it was in a safe location. So an ordinance would do all those things. The only difference will be that it won't just apply to collection boxes. It will apply to all similarly sized receptacles.
Good.
Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, for one, would recommend that we include that in the ordinance, regulation of collection bins on private property. So that's what I would like to see. Beyond that, I would like to invite Gary Harris, our Director of Street Use from Bureau of Street Services, to answer a question that I have. Gary, if you don't mind. We have a proliferation. The proliferation of these has already happened. They're everywhere. We especially have them in historic Filipino Town, Echo Park. I walk by one in Glassell Park every time I walk my dog, and it's by a street that doesn't even go all the way through. It's on a sidewalk. It's filthy, collects nothing but trash right outside someone's home on the sidewalk. It's ridiculous. What is currently the process for just getting them removed? Do we send an address to you? Could you take us through what we can do right now?
We do take those complaints now, and we're primarily complaint-driven on this issue. We do have a process in place where we notice these bins. We do contact the companies. In fact, some of the ones that have been mentioned, we've already had hearings with over this matter of removing these from the public right-of-way. The major change that we're talking about here with this ordinance is that under current ordinance, we're holding them, under current practice, I should say, we're holding these bins for 90 days. And we have a space issue of collecting more and more bins off the street because we have to hold them. With this clarification, if we're going to be able to recycle is what we do, recycle these bins in a faster period of time, that will relieve some of our problem with keeping up with the complaints, because now we won't have the space issue to hold the bins that we're doing now. But we do have the process in place of making those notifications. We work with the companies. The reality is that we've found the companies do not come to us, and we end up holding most of these bins, even after notification, for the entire period before we then recycle them and move and make space in our facilities.
And are you holding them just out of an abundance of precaution? Is that why you're holding them rather than disposing of them?
Prior to the amendment of 5611, that was a legal requirement basically for everything that we took off the street. We held it for 90 days to protect the city from some civil liability.
So, Gary, how many times has any company ever come back and claimed a donation bin that you've been holding? Has it ever happened?
To my knowledge, they've never come back.
So let's consider. Well, I'm going there. Why don't we consider them just like we do the sheds then? Because I would imagine we're going to run out of storage space pretty quickly, not to mention the staff time of transporting them from one place to be held for 90 days for nothing, and then cataloging, and then getting the date right so that they're hauled away to recycling. I would recommend that we just go straight to disposal / recycling right away. And the other question, if we give you a list of addresses where these donation bins have been sitting there neglected for the most part in our district, you'd be able to cross-reference what whom you've already sort of sent a notice to in terms of ownership and which ones you haven't.
Yes.
And then you'd be able to maybe put a plan of date of pickup together, and then just carry it out and pick them up and get them off the streets.
Absolutely.
And do you have a practice of posting a notice actually on the bin as well, or?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Now there is one issue though with the bins that I believe was mentioned earlier. A number of the bins that we do go out on and we get a complaint on in the public right-of-way are actually not on the public right-of-way. They appear to be on the right-of-way, but they're on private property setbacks. They're on parking lots where they abut the right-of-way. And unfortunately, with the 5611 process, we can't collect those bins. We have to go to Building and Safety and go through a nuisance process with Building and Safety to have those bins removed. So one of the issues with the bins that we found, a high percentage of the reports we get are not really on the public right-of-way. And so that causes some of the confusion in how long it takes for those bins to be removed from the right-of-way. But with this clarification that we've received today, if we are authorized to immediately start removing and disposing, then obviously for the ones that we do find on the public right-of-way, this will greatly speed up our process.
Thank you, Gary. And would I be accurate if I said that even if a portion of this bin was on the public right-of-way, then it's eligible for the city to remove it?
Yes.
Or does it have to be more than 50% or something?
If we deem that it's on the right-of-way, a portion, we're going to remove it.
We can take it. Okay, and then lastly, rather than go through a rigmarole with Building and Safety, if we could go to the property owner and they could submit a letter and say, we don't want this on our property, couldn't they just send that to you and you could just go pick it up?
If they have not authorized it to be there, they free us to do it, sure.
That'd be an
no
easier
problem.
process rather than getting building and safety involved. Just get a letter directly from the property owner, and that way we could, just have it picked up. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. You've been deemed. You've been given the authority to remove these boxes from here on out. Guys, as much as we love our city, our men and women who work for this city, but we cannot be afraid to do our jobs and think 90 days this, 90 days that. If we have an ordinance in place, such as 5611 on bulky items, we need to remove these things that are impacting our quality of life. The broken windows theory 101. From here, you have all kinds of clothes, graffiti, and they're just sitting there, look like crap. Miss Martinez.
I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Harris. I think to date you've removed 23 of these bins from my district. You've done an amazing job. You've been very, very helpful to my office. So thank you very much. The last question, the one question I did have was, once the ordinance goes into effect, we have the ability to fine these organizations that do not go pick up their bin or trash, for lack of a better word?
Yes, on private property, all of them will be required to have a permit, and if they violate the terms of the permit, either by not maintaining or not putting them in the right spot, then there are fines
attached to that.
Right. And if there are repeat offenses, we'll be able to have.
There's a cost associated to us having to remove the bin, having to store the bin. Now that that's been cleared up, but nevertheless, we should try to recuperate our costs as well, especially for these bins that are not being monitored.
In the future, after we've picked up all the bins that are currently in place, if we find a bin, we could also consider, writing a police report for illegal dumping, because they're not allowed on. Now that 5611 is on the books, they're not allowed on public property. The one thing about these collection bins is they usually identify the owner, so we might have the ability in the future now as to the new bins that are placed to go after.
Can we include that in the ordinance?
We don't need to. It's already in the law.
Mr. Rue?
And actually, on that, you're talking about private property, right?
Public.
Oh, public. Okay, so yeah, so it would.
On private property, the property owner could bring a trespass action,
Right.
Against the company if they don't have permission to.
Right, but in private property, if they get a permit, we could still fine them if they're not abiding by the permit.
Yes.
And in public property, now that we're banning them all, you're going to have a proper educational component to let everybody know that this is going to go into place. And once all that's done, we're going to be able to pick it up and fine the company, right?
Well, the educational process we would recommend is simply posting the actual box, and then to the extent we know who the owner is or have an ability to send a written notice, do that as well, and then at the appointed day, come and pick it up and destroy it.
So I had a question. How do these boxes make money? Is it the actual contents or is it the advertising? So they actually pick up the contents.
Well, there was a couple of years ago, there was a whole expose on 2020 on one of these TV channels where they actually went in to investigate where some of these countries, whether it was a legitimate nonprofit and where the clothing was going. Some of them are selling them to third world countries, and it's actually an actual business. It's very convoluted, but there is a lot of misperception.
They're profiting off of our public spaces. They're profiting off these companies.
There's several of these companies.
They would be violating a 501c because people.
Well, like I said, you have to watch. I mean, it's very interesting, and they have these warehouses, these huge warehouses in and around LA County, where all this stuff is collected and
I can only
taken to.
imagine the county health issues associated with sanitation,
All I can tell
sanitary
you is,
conditions, and
based on what I saw,
again, public health, I think, comes into play here.
but you would have to do your own research. But that's what I recall a couple of years ago.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, again, thanks for the great work you and your team doing.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Flores, this item before us will give the direction to the city attorney to seek regulations on private property as it pertains to these donation collection bins and other receptacles as well. Not specifically but other receptacles. Thank you for that. Okay, item number 5. We'll approve item number 4 without objection. Item number 5. They're all very, you're right, Ms. Martinez, very similar.
I'm comfortable with what Ms. Flores had mentioned earlier, as long as the ordinance reflects all illegal place dumpsters, pods, storage containers, that kind of
all receptacles.
I'm comfortable with that.
If I can ask Mr. Harris to come forward on the reporting of these items. It seems there's a flaw in the 311 app. How's your team managing the 311 request? Because and the reason why I raise this is because my legislative director here, Mr. Gleason, has put in numerous requests, and these receptacles are still in place, dating from August 8th, 2014, September 18th, 2014, June 27th, 2015, and August 23rd, 2015. And I know what you indicated, how most of these requests come from constituents, businesses, but we feel there's a flaw here in the 311. Can you explain the process and how you responded to the 311 app?
Yeah, there's a huge distinction between what we're talking about here and collection bins. These are building materials, or under the Los Angeles Municipal Code, they're in Section 6245, a permittable item. So when we get a complaint, one of the first things we do is go out and look at the location and see if it's safe for a bin to be at that location. We inquire with the property owner why they have the bin. If they are actually involved in construction on the property, then they are legally permitted to get a permit to have a bin adjacent to their property for an ongoing
These are on
project.
Sidewalks, sir.
On sidewalks?
Yes.
Those would not be permitted. Just the bins that are out in front of the property.
Yeah, these are on sidewalks. I don't public right of way. If you can look into these complaints, I'd appreciate it. These are clothing bins, yes.
What's helped us is in our office, our deputies go out and take pictures and addresses and then forward them to you in a spreadsheet, and that's how we've been able to track them.
And those are a couple in CD10, a couple in CD5 where Dennis lives, so I appreciate the follow-up on that. Mr. Rue.
Can you walk us through the for the dumpsters for construction? Walk us through the process of how people apply and when it becomes legal to illegal.
The intent of our ordinance is to make it a temporary construction bin, so it's only a 30-day permit. And what the property owner...
30 days is the maximum you could permit.
Unfortunately, our code allows unlimited extensions, but it is a minimum. The maximum on your first permit is 30 days. However, the way the code is worded, as long as you're continuing to do active construction, we can't deny you extensions on the permit. So while it is intended to be only a temporary permit, major projects may take 2 years, and the bin can remain in the street the way the ordinance is currently worded for the period of that construction, just by resubmitting the permit application every 30-day period. These types of bins are only allowed when there is absolutely no way to put the bin on private property. And so with a lot of construction, especially here in the downtown area, the construction is to the property line. So there is no place to place these materials, so we have to offer them the opportunity to use it on the right-of-way, provided the area is safe and they can meet the conditions, which already would call for reflectors. It would call for the maintenance. They have to keep the bin empty. They cannot let things gather around the bin. They're supposed to have a barricade with a reflector also near the bin. So all of these things are already called for in our permit guidelines for these types of dumpsters in the right-of-way. I think that the bigger problem for us in enforcing the dumpster issue in Los Angeles is, unlike our neighboring cities, the way that you get a bin in all the cities that surround us is you have to go through the authorized trash provider. That authorized trash provider then also acts as the collector of any bins that are not permitted. They have a motivation to do this because they are the only ones authorized to license those bins. Here in LA, we have an open system, so any provider that the Bureau of Sanitation has licensed as a rubbish hauler can put out bins in our city for these types of construction programs, putting the onus for all the enforcement back on the city as opposed to the collection agency. And so it makes it a little more of a challenge for us than our neighbors and the code enforcement units in the other areas next to us, because it's very easy for them to determine that there's only one authorized provider, and anything that doesn't have that on it is automatically illegal and immediately removed from the right-of-way.
So do the authorized bin providers, they drive around and look for bins that's not authorized in other cities? Is that what they, or?
Yeah, and they collect, as they're in effect the OPG for bins as a part of their contract to have the collective responsibility in that city. And so they aid in keeping the bins out that aren't permitted in that city.
My office would love to follow up with you on that and trying to figure out how we can do that here. And Mr. And because I'm concerned about in our district, so in my district are those big bins, right? And they take up parking space.
Correct.
In the lowland, in the flatlands, it's not as, I guess people could live with it, but up in the hillsides where there are very narrow streets and there's multiple constructions, and it makes it very dangerous. But you're saying, so as long as the construction is going on, they could just, if it's going on for 2 years, they can keep it there for 2 years?
They can keep renewing the permit. Now, the hillsides have different restrictions. There are restrictions on the high bins. They can only use the low boys. And there are more requirements on where a bin can be placed in hillside areas due to the issues you raised of safety. They're not supposed to be using conventional bins in the hillside. So when we do get a report on that, that's an enforcement issue for us in the hillside areas.
What about, they have, sometimes they have a stop in construction for several months. They could just leave it up there, or?
If we can prove that there's no active construction, we can force the removal of the bin.
But we'd love to follow up with you on and trying to help you out with that.
Sure.
The beauty of sitting in Public Works Committee, Mr. Root. Resources at our hands. Amazing work. Thank you so much to you and your entire team.
And I'd be happy to take any more addresses you have for these. So
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Get to the bottom
I know
of
you
what
will.
happened.
I appreciate your responsiveness.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for being responsive. Thank you. I don't know, Miss Martinez, 27. 27. Picked up. Good work. Okay, so for this item, we'll ask for a report back in 30 days on Mr. Harris. He mentioned amending the existing ordinance, redrafting the new ordinance on regulating these illegally placed receptacles. You're working on the ordinance right now. Get back to us in
Right,
30 days
so-
on the ordinance.
Well, on the public right-of-way, we already have
We have that, I'm
5611
saying-
will cover it. So
right.
we will be bringing back an ordinance that will
Private.
require permits on private property
right.
for receptacles over a certain size that would cover these boxes as well as other receptacles.
Okay, without objection, that'll be the order. Well, hold it for 30 days until we get a report back. Right, I know. Let's end the practice of storing these items for 90 days. We have an ordinance in place. Thank you. I think you've sensed the frustration from this committee. Okay, our sixth and final item. This is if you can read that into the record. Good afternoon.
Mr. Chair, council members, Jose Garcia, LA Sanitation. Currently, we are responding to all illegal dumping being reported either through constituents, through my LA 311, mayor's office, council offices. So we're doing our best to get a handle on all the illegal dumpings that are reported. Currently, our Clean Street program is picking up an average of 850 tons per month of illegal dump material out in the streets. Through the sources right now, the things that have been referred, there's probably about 150 to 180 in queue that are about, less than a month old, that are in queue for day of service. When we go to the council districts, we address those as we go along with all the council requests that come through the chronic list or any particular items that you wish to address that are of topic for yourselves. That's about it for a report. Yeah.
How are we doing on the rewards of illegal dumping rewards across the city? Have you seen an increase?
The rewards, you can speak on that.
We're continuing to work with the city attorney's office on that. There's a team being put together to address that situation.
I know there's cameras up across the city. Mr. Price has cameras. Mr. Cedillo.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the enforcement. I'm Gonzalo Barriga with Sanitation. Just to give you some general numbers, since January 1st, we've responded to 1,509 calls for illegal dumping. They can be subcategorized into bio-waste, illicit discharge, illicit connections, abandoned waste, containers, and so forth. 118 calls for accidental spills. And there's two other constituents that we will also continue to work on, which is surveillance. There's different types of surveillance. There's, sitting in a car waiting for something to happen, and then we're kind of focusing on the digital side. As you were saying, Councilmember Price, we have 3 cameras that are actually currently up in his district that he helped fund. We also have one camera for Council District 14 that we also operate, but they are specific to those
cameras. Working? They seem to be productive?
Right now we have 3 cameras up.
Working?
They're working. They're working. They're up and running.
Good thing.
We can bring them up and bring them live. The thing is it's we have to be able to get a lead. We have to get a plate. We have to have something on the side of the door.
Are these license recognition cameras?
Yes, they are. They are. Yes, they are. So they can see at night. They use infrared. But at the same time, we're working with resource. We don't really have a lot of resources to do all this stuff. So we're managing the best we can. Right now we have like 2 guys trying to manage that, along with the other homeless encampment cleanups that we do and all the other inspections and all the other stuff that we do. Since the beginning of the year, we have done also 732 homeless encampments, so we're averaging a little over 100 a month. In 2014, it was like 20 a month. So we really haven't been given resources to manage that, and that's a whole new task that was brought onto our unit. So
we appreciate the work you're doing. You were in my district this last Saturday. I know Mr. O'Farrell's as well.
Yep.
A lot of work.
And one of the other big things that we're a part of is we work on the city attorney's strike force for illegal dumping, environmental crimes. We also work with the DA and the U.S. Attorney's Office on those kinds of issues. So unless you have any questions.
Have you seen an uptick in illegal dumping within the last 6 months to a year?
From my stance, it's kind of just been stable. We get calls. It goes up 1 month. It comes down another month. As the reporting or one of the big issues or the big things that we've noticed is the sanitation has ramped up the hours with the call center, and so we're generating more calls because they're open and taking more calls. And as My 311 app and My 311 work better, we clearly see more calls coming in through the system.
Yeah, you've been real responsive. We've been using the 311 app with the sofas and the mattresses, and they're gone. I hear it from my field deputies. You get picked up within 24 hours. So great work on that piece.
Yeah, that's Pepe and the bulky item pickup team, Sanitation, yeah.
Ms. Martinez?
I have a question about the 311 app. So right now, that's currently the only way you're able to pick up bulky items. I'm referring to maybe possibly being a little bit more reactive in terms of the alleyways and the apartment buildings, because those are notorious for having bulky items anytime anyone moves out of an apartment. So you have to go through 311, or can you just pick up those bulky items?
So it sounds like you want a little more proactive. Right now we're dealing with the calls. I'll let Pepe talk about that, but for proactive, just assuming and doing
because
a route.
Back in the old days when I was growing up, before the automated way of picking up trash, we used to have 1 or 2 people on a truck, and so you'd be able to not only empty out the trash can, but there'd be 1 or 2 other people helping identify those mattresses and loading them up on the truck and so on. So I'm just thinking of other ways, and perhaps we can get to the alleys and around the apartment buildings where you know that on a Monday you're going to have the couch, the mattress, the TV, and so on.
Well, historically, where there's a lot of apartment dwellings, a lot of it's kind of a we call it every first and last of the month. You have this in and out of people moving in and out, and furniture either left or discarded. We try to address all of it. It comes down to resources. So you may see a spike at that particular time of the month, but we do have roving crews that sweep the areas.
That come in after the
they
trash
come and
gets
they
picked up?
sweep. It's, give you an example. The Pico Union area is just 75% multifamily, and there is a spike, and you notice it first and last of the month, and then it kind of right when we get caught up, it just spikes again. But that's just the nature of the type of dwellings. But we do have crews that go out there.
And that's not to say you don't pick them up, because you do. I mean, people who report to the 311 app, definitely is probably one of the most brilliant things we've ever came up with as a city, because it costs absolutely nothing to be able to take a picture and report it to the department. But I was thinking of another proactive way to sort of get to those alleys and apartment buildings. But you answered my question. I had another question about exploring possible partnerships, perhaps with Caltrans. In my district in particular, around the Sun Valley area, all the off-ramps are notorious for just being filthy, because you have those landfills and those MRFs in Sun Valley where the trash gets taken to. So there's a lot of debris that kind of flies out of the sanitation truck or what have you. Is there any possibility to reach out to Caltrans and figure out a way to partner with them, because they can't keep up with the on-ramps and off-ramps in my district? There's that much trash. Added with the bulky items, it's a mess.
Well, my experience with Caltrans, they're resource limited also, so it all depends on who volunteers on that particular, where they can assist and get court referrals or whatever. But as far as partnering up, each district, each waste shed has contact information when they see bulky items, especially on on-ramps and off-ramps. I used to manage the downtown area where there's a lot of on-ramps and off-ramps, so they address it as on a call if they get it referred to. But being proactive, I don't know how they operate, so I couldn't really tell you. But you're talking more about loose debris and loose trash.
Loose debris, trash, bulky
kind of
items,
stuff.
you name it. When you get off on Sheldon, you get off on Tuxford, you get off on any of those streets along the 5 freeway, it's the amount of semis that use that corridor, the sanitation trucks that are either going to the landfill or going to a nearby MRF. All of that adds to the debris on those off and on ramps.
Along with all the dust and dirt.
And the dust and the dirt, the gravel pit, you name it, we've got it in Council District 6. So I'm constantly trying to figure out a way to get those guys to come out and clean up some of these ramps.
When it comes to dealing with stuff like that, more sweeping would probably be a suggestion for the loose debris on the sidewalks and streets. But as far as partnering up with Caltrans, my experience with them has been that they're on resource limited and just on a call basis wherever a concern might be addressed or identified.
Okay, thank you. I just thought I'd ask if you had explored that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. O'Farrell. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pepe, Mr. Garcia, thank you for being an outstanding leader at North Central Sanitation Yard. You do a terrific job up there. Thank you. Your guys and gals on the team. Number one, good job.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
We love working with you, and I think Marisol, my district director, is your best friend. She probably talks with you every day. I know I'm not alone in being so frustrated with the culture of lawlessness we have in LA when it comes to people just throwing trash everywhere, dumping things, throwing trash near where I live. The Improvement Association that I belong to, they do these flash cleanups. There's just no reason for the amount of trash that gets thrown out of car windows or dumped out of someone's car because they've been through to a fast food restaurant. I want to see so much more enforcement, and I want to see these people get $500 tickets and pay for polluting Los Angeles. I know I'm not alone in that. We're all tired of it. This past weekend, you cleaned up an alley in my district that is just a habitual dumping ground of trash. We think that it's a trash hauler that services local apartment buildings, and to save money, they simply just dump all their trash in an alley that's 1 block long. And it's so completely outrageous. School kids have to walk through that alley on their way to school. Well, you all cleaned it up this week, so thank you. But the problem isn't going to go away until we actually catch, arrest, and convict the person who's doing that. So I, for one, want to see more arrests and convictions. To that end, what is the minimum in terms of evidence that we need to lead to a successful illegal dumping conviction? What's the minimum amount of evidence? Because sometimes people will provide video and give a license tag number and be an eyewitness, but that doesn't seem to always be enough. So what is it going to take for us to get some convictions?
Mitch, we have Ms. Rudin here from the city attorney's office. She can answer that.
I'm sorry. What was the alley that you were just speaking?
I was at Rampart Village, and it was parallel with Beverly Boulevard, just south, between Juanita and what was the other street? Vermont. Actually, it was one over, but it was in that vicinity, right off of Juanita.
If you, we'll be there every week, because if that's the problem and it's constant. As far as the minimum requirements, I mean,
right. I know that we have.
You can catch
legal
somebody,
counsel.
it would help us a lot. We can concentrate somewhere else where it might need it, but.
Me too. I was thinking the same thing. Put me in a truck, give me a badge, you know.
That would be
good to go.
That would be a question for you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Elise Rudin. I'm with the Environmental Justice and Protection Section. I'm also chair of the Los Angeles City Attorney's illegal dumping strike force. And would you like me just to answer your question right now?
Yes, and has the task force led to some illegal dumping convictions, or are you optimistic it will?
It has. We've had I had a multi-jurisdictional case where defendant case. There were 3 defendants. They all 3 took a plea. 2 of the defendants paid in excess of $2,000 fine or were placed on probation, and one of the defendants, who was more of an aider and abetter, he did community service along with probation. One of the things we're going to just work on is trying to get the people that we catch to actually go out and perform some of the pickup, but we have to coordinate that with the court. I would say that we've had probably about 5 or 6 convictions. I have to check also, because I know out in CD6 we've had quite a few cases that have been filed recently. Thank you to your staff who've been really helpful. And I think I just got those, an update last week, but I don't know what the status of those cases are, so I apologize for that. In terms of the minimum that we would need, we don't need a camera. I mean, it's always nice to have a camera. We would need at least an eyewitness and someone who'd be able to identify the perpetrator. If we get a license plate number, that's great, because then we can at least trace that automobile to a registered owner, but we do have some issues linking that registered owner to the actual perpetrator of the crime. However, there are code sections. We try to get creative. There's an LAMC code section that makes it illegal, for instance, for somebody's trash to end up out in the public, not in a bin and being taken away. And so my partners and Street Services, Mr. Harris's group, they will literally dig through the trash, and if they find addresses and personal items, they can take that down as evidence, and then we can contact those individuals and also let them know they're in violation of the law under the municipal code.
Thank you. And on the ordinance piece, do you see any necessary changes that we could make to help with enforcement, or that could help?
Yeah, I mean, resources are a huge issue. You've mentioned the 311 difficulties. That makes it difficult for all of us to get the cases. Just so you know, on our task force, we have about 12 to 13 sites that we have identified as chronic in Los Angeles. There are obviously more. We could easily double that. So I bring that up because of all of the problems with 311. A lot of times, since we have a small amount of identified chronic locations, oftentimes my office will send out a letter to some of the area residents, and I'll just put my phone number as a direct contact sometimes, just in the interim until we can expand out further. We've talked about an investigator would be extremely helpful for us, because when we do get calls with license numbers, we would like to try to hit those very quickly, have someone go out, get the initial information, and then we can contact. And I was just talking with our partners, enforcement partners, about then coming together and trying to work out protocols so that our office and their offices can work in conjunction and relatively quickly. Public information is always going to be helpful as well.
Are the fines that we impose, are they adequate enough to discourage this illegal activity?
The fines are fine. I think it might also be, if I may, helpful if we could have some language that might aid in taking some of the monies that we get from the fines and be able to put them in a fund to pay for enforcement, for cameras, for overtime. Those things, I think, would be really helpful, because then the perpetrators would help defray the costs that we are incurring in the enforcement.
I'm in. I like that a lot. Fantastic. The idea was just conveyed to us from the city attorney that if some of the fines, some of the dollars from the fines collected could go back into resources.
Enforcement, right? Oh, yeah, and personnel, right?
Well,
personnel and equipment and
overtime,
different
inspection, etc.
What do we need to do? We draft the motion. We have to amend anything. I mean, this is a report. There's only a report.
So
action.
if you're going to keep this open, then maybe we could get more about that when it comes back, and then we could draft it into some ordinance.
What we can do, perhaps, is even drop the motion and look at this.
Okay. Well, that's great feedback. And I will say that we can certainly do more, but I will also say the state can certainly do more. My district is crisscrossed with freeways. I've got over 80% renters in apartments. And when we engage our state partners, they'll come with us, but the state must do more. I think we have to ask our colleagues at the state level to do more in terms of resources for Caltrans through the city of Los Angeles.
If I may, just on the Caltrans issue really quickly, there is a new area that we just put on our list. It's in CD10, and we are having an initial meeting on that location, and we're inviting Caltrans because it happens to be off of freeway. And I will reach out to Caltrans and ask that they attend some of our task force meetings, because I think that's an excellent suggestion.
They're generally good partners, but we need our colleagues in the Assembly and Senate to give them more resources as well in the budget, in the state budget.
Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell. Mr. Price.
No, I agree wholeheartedly in that. Indeed, the 110 freeway, which runs north-south in my district, roughly from Washington to Normandy, Washington to Manchester. And we've got parts along there, as you all know, along Flower, along Grand, that just are habitual dumping grounds. I mean, we've been doing a lot better, and I applaud you for your efforts, working collaboratively with the office, because I think that has definitely made a difference. But we just got to, like you say, think smarter and figure out how, we deploy more cameras, how we engage the neighbors. The heartbreaking thing is to see neighbors across the street, lawns are well maintained, pride of ownership, and they've got to put up with these dumpings that are just so senseless. Question though, on the fine and on the just a PR. Is there a PR campaign planned or in place? Something the council offices can partner with you on, getting the word out, encouraging people to be, vigilant, be our eyes and ears, especially in those areas where we're putting cameras. What else can we do more proactively to sort of engage citizens?
Well, one of the things we're doing is, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Sorry. We're going to be working with Crime Stoppers as well. That's an organization that allows people to call in anonymously, and they also do, I believe, provide rewards. That's one thing we're working on and hoping to announce. The other thing that we've been doing is we've been working a lot with community partners throughout every district, and we want to have the opportunity to highlight their either individuals and or businesses, and highlight those parties so that the word gets out that the public have been a great partner to us in all of this. So as part of a PR campaign, we hope to make some announcements so people, know that we're paying attention to the problem, and also maybe a number to call in for rewards, and also just highlight our community partners, and they're an absolute essential to what's our success. There are many businesses and, as I said, individuals as well in all districts.
Also, the Bureau of Street Services has a program that we are looking to expand with our Reserve Investigator program. These people are trained specifically for surveillance on illegal dumping. We have a program up and running now, but we hope that with support and funding, we can get a dedicated individual for our reserve program so that we can deploy teams of our reserves with our normal investigators to do this proactive surveillance in the alleys. We had a very active program in years past, and one of the things we found most successful, the reality is actually catching people and arresting people, which sends the message that this activity will not be tolerated in the city. So our goal is to greatly expand the number of volunteer reserves that we have qualified to work in this program to maximize our resources without extending as much expense to the city by utilizing a full-time volunteer coordinator.
What kind of training is required for that?
We have a what's called a Level 3 Reserve Academy. It's a 6-week police academy training that all of our investigators go through. They're all post-certified. We have a memorandum of agreement with the LAPD that grants our people peace officer status in order to make these arrests. And in the past, when we've had this team out there, they've been very successful in making apprehensions.
I agree. I would support something like that. I think we need to be deploying a variety of resources and, as you said, leveraging the limited ones and providing some service and training. So.
One of the frustrations. Thank you so much. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
If I may, just a thought, just a personal experience, if you don't mind. Councilman O'Farrell, when I was a kid, probably when I started driving in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a flood of commercials of famous American Indians standing by the roadside with dirt being thrown out. Well, I happened to get caught and got a ticket, and I communicated it at home. They're going to catch you, they're going to fine you, it costs this much. Back then, $50 was a lot of money. But there seems to be a lack of PR, and that was such a famous commercial.
It was Iron Ice Cody.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was such a famous commercial for such a long time and people that got caught in stings, if you want to call it, kind of could relate to that and communicate it within their own communities. Because I know I did.
I agree with you completely, and I'm old enough to remember Lady Bird Johnson, the first lady who was like the whole Keep America Clean in the 60s. And so Nuri just said it, we've lost our way. We need to get people vested back into, you can keep your own environment clean so that the Native American chief doesn't have to cry. I like that.
There's nothing in place today that people can relate to as far as on TV. Just to put that. Thank you.
Right.
Is that right?
And just to also add, we've had resources added to our unit. We're expecting a large number of new candidates for our team, but it takes time to hire these people and train them. But we're expecting in the next year to at least be doubling our forces on our end to just essentially help us out there.
Doubling to what number?
We're going to get at least 20 guys, and that's almost doubling what we have now. So,
okay, that's the mayor, the council's elevated commitment to ensuring that we keep our streets clean and holding those accountable, and continue to promote personal responsibility and keeping the front of your home and where you live clean and passable as well. It gives me an opportunity also to thank the champions in our respective council districts who take it upon themselves and do voluntary cleanups, weekly cleanups as well. We're so blessed to have these individuals who serve our districts throughout the city of LA. I mean, we clean Wilmington, clean San Pedro, clean Watts, Southeast. We have the CPAB, the Spanish CPAB individuals in my district. I know you have others as well. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your presentation. Want to recognize Captain Orb, who's here, as well as Commander Akros as well. Thank you for being here. I know you're working hand in hand with both sanitation and street services day in and day out. Appreciate your service. So this is no action, just a presentation only, item number 6. And going back to our agenda, this is now time for general public comment. We have 2 cards on general public comment. I do not see them here. That's Herman and Wayne. With that, we are adjourned, and we'll see you tomorrow in council.